This lesson would be part of a broader unit on listening skills. This is something that I would probably do at the beginning of the academic year, and I would give this sheet to the child. It's color-coded. This unit works best for kids in grades 7 to 12, high school kids in particular. And what we're focusing on this week is step number 5. We're imagining we've already done steps 1 through 4. And step number 5 in listening skills is asking questions. Now, I would start off by saying, I want to talk about something that happens to everyone once in a while. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how old you are. Imagine that you're sitting in your class, the teacher is talking, and if things are going great, you're using all of your great listening skills, when suddenly you realize that you're completely lost, you're confused about something that the teacher is saying. So what do you do in that situation? Now, fortunately, we have a great tool that we can use, and that is to ask questions. When you ask questions the right way, first of all, it shows the teacher that you're paying attention, and it shows the teacher that you want to learn. And of course, any teacher would be very happy to know that their students are paying attention and that they want to learn. So, the other thing is, what kind of question do you ask? First of all, the first step would be to remain calm. If you have a question, if you're confused, if you're lost, remember that you can always get back on track even if you're confused. The second step would be to raise your hand and wait patiently to be called on. This is very important. And at this point, I would actually model raising my hand and waiting to be called on. And then, if needed, we would practice this before we move on. We would practice raising your hand and waiting quietly and patiently until the teacher calls on you. The next step would be to ask a question. And what kind of question are you asking? Well, it depends on what is confusing you. And at this point, I would introduce 3 model questions that can be used in this situation. The first model question would be if you understand everything except one word that's confusing you. In that case, you would use this model sentence, which is, what does that word mean? And we would practice this. For example, you could say, if the teacher said, I ate asparagus for lunch. You understand that sentence, but if you don't know what asparagus is, then you can raise your hand, wait to be called on, and say, what does asparagus mean? Then, of course, the teacher would explain what asparagus is. Now, if you understand the words, but you're not sure about a new idea that's introduced, then you can use this model sentence, which is, can you explain that one more time about whatever the idea is? And I would give an example of that as well. And we can practice these different concepts. And then, now the third type of question is, if you're following along and you understand up until a certain point, and then after that you just get completely lost and you have no idea what they're talking about, then you can raise your hand and ask the third question, which is, I understood everything until blank, but after that you lost me. And so at least you're telling the teacher, this is as far as I understand, and then after that I'm confused, please can you back up and go again. And it's okay to ask the teacher if they're going too fast, ask them to slow down, but you need to do it politely. So at this point, we would practice with a few examples of each of the kinds of questions, and then we would role play. We would take turns between playing the part of the teacher and playing the part of the student, until the students are comfortable asking questions in this format. So, for example, I would play the student, and then my student would play the part of the teacher, and that person would teach me something. He would tell me, for example, what he did this morning or what he had for breakfast, and I, playing the student, would raise my hand and wait to be called on, and then ask one of these 3 questions, depending on what kind of question I have. this unit is too difficult for one of my students, one way I would make it easier would be just to focus on one of the three kinds of questions. So let's say we're focusing on what does that mean, asking what something means. So I would maybe just read out a very simple sentence, but with one word that's intentionally confusing. So for example, I might say, I think the school cafeteria's hamburgers are atrocious. And I would emphasize atrocious. This is the word that I'm trying to get your attention with. And so if, hopefully from that emphasis, the student would understand that they're supposed to ask, what does atrocious mean? And if they're still not getting it, then I would maybe use some kind of cue, or I would point to this sentence on their page to show that this is the question they're meant to ask. And so I would say, I think the school cafeteria's hamburgers are atrocious. And then I would point to this, and the student would say, what does atrocious mean? And again, we would model this back and forth. I'm going to play the teacher while they play the student, and then they're going to play the teacher while I play the student. On the other hand, if I have a student who is demonstrating a high level of proficiency in asking the questions, they're having a really easy time grasping the concept of the different kinds of questions, then I will move on to phase 2 of this question activity, which normally I would wait until another week, but if they're doing really well, I would add another layer to this, which is basically we go through the same steps. So raise your hand, ask to be called on, and then the teacher answers. The next step would be for the student to repeat what the teacher said in their own words. And the sentence cue that they would use for that is, so you're saying, okay, let me give an example. If the teacher said, I had asparagus for lunch today, and the student said, what does asparagus mean? Then the teacher says, well, asparagus is a tall, thin, green plant that I ate, and it's boiled or baked. So then the student would say, so you're saying that asparagus is a vegetable, and it's green, and it's something that you like to eat for lunch. And the teacher would say, yes, that's correct. Or they would say, no, it's not correct. And in that case, we would have another question about whatever the student found confusing, and this would keep going until they have their answer. And then, of course, at the end of the lesson, I will have this large text of the 3 questions, and I would put hole punches to put it into their binder to send it home with them to study. And in situations where we have things that they need to practice, I might also email a copy to their teacher or teachers and to the parents so that they know this is what they need to be practicing at home.